three words that would have been unthinkable at the start of this conflict. Three words that every foreign ministry on earth is now reading and rereading, passing to senior advisors, forwarding to heads of state, trying to understand exactly what threshold just got crossed and what the crossing of it means for everything that comes next. Israel struck the house of Russian culture in Nabatea, southern Lebanon. A building that doesn't belong to Hezbollah, that doesn't belong to Iran, that doesn't belong to any militia, any proxy, any armed faction operating in the chaotic southern Lebanese theater that Israel has been striking with increasing intensity for weeks. It belongs to Russia, to Rosotrudnichestvo, the official Russian state agency that operates cultural centers abroad as direct, formal extensions of the Russian government's sovereign presence in foreign countries. Russia has confirmed the strike. An official statement is coming. And the silence between that confirmation and that statement is the most loaded silence in this entire conflict. Every word that statement contains, and every word it deliberately omits, will be parsed by intelligence agencies from Washington to Beijing before the ink is dry. Let's be precise about what happened here, because precision matters in a way it almost never has before in this conflict. And this conflict has already produced moments that required extraordinary precision of understanding. Israel did not strike a building that Russia had some peripheral connection to. Israel did not strike in the vicinity of a Russian installation while targeting something nearby. Israel struck cultural property that belongs, formally and legally and diplomatically, to a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, one of 5 countries on Earth with that designation, one of the 9 countries on Earth with confirmed nuclear weapons capability, a country with approximately 6,000 deployed nuclear warheads, the largest arsenal on the planet, the same country whose nuclear engineers and technicians built and have operated the Bushehr reactor that Israel bombed weeks ago, an act that Russia absorbed in silence, an act that someone in Tel Aviv's military planning structure apparently interpreted as a green light to continue. That interpretation may have just produced the most consequential miscalculation of this entire war. Russia has shown extraordinary, almost puzzling restraint throughout this conflict. The kind of restraint that the Western media largely stopped noticing because it became the background assumption, the default setting, the thing everyone just counted on Russia continuing to do while the real action happened elsewhere. Russia watched American bases across Iraq and the Gulf get systematically reduced to rubble by Iranian drones and missiles. It watched Iran's nuclear infrastructure take strike after strike. It watched the entire Gulf security architecture, built over 4 decades of American investment and treaty commitment, disintegrate in real time. It watched the Strait of Hormuz close to commercial traffic. It watched oil prices spiral towards scenarios that analysts 3 weeks ago called extreme and that analysts today call baseline. It watched a region it has spent decades cultivating strategic influence and burn week by week, and it issued statements, called for ceasefires at the Security Council, used the language of restrained diplomatic condemnation, did what great powers do when they are holding their position, waiting, calculating, not yet ready, or not yet willing to move from words to something with more weight behind it. That restraint just got tested in a register it has never been tested in before during this conflict. Because there is a difference, a fundamental and legally and diplomatically meaningful difference, between attacking a country's military assets, its regional proxies, the allies it supplies and supports, and the citizens of its partner states. And there is a different category of act entirely when you strike the sovereign cultural property of a nuclear-armed permanent Security Council member. The House of Russian Culture in Nabatea was not a weapons depot. It was not a command and control node. It was not a logistics hub or a communications relay or any of the dual-use infrastructure designations that military planners reach for when they need to justify a strike on something that looks to civilian eyes like a civilian building. It was a library, a performance space, a center for language instruction and cultural exchange, and the quiet, patient work of projecting Russian soft power into the Lebanese cultural landscape. It had a Russian flag on it. It had Russian staff in it. It was as unambiguously Russian sovereign territory as you can get outside the borders of Russia itself. International law has a specific and carefully constructed category for exactly this kind of building. The 1954 Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the Event of Armed Conflict exists precisely, and specifically to establish that certain structures carry a different and elevated level of protection regardless of where they sit geographically, regardless of what conflict surrounds them, regardless of what strategic calculations the attacking party believes justify the strike. Israel is not a signatory to that convention. It has never been. But Russia is, and Russia does not need to reach for a legal argument to formulate its response. It does not need to cite conventions or protocols or the findings of some future war crimes tribunal. It needs only a decision, and that decision is now sitting on a desk in Moscow being made by someone with the authority to make it. Now here's the operational question that no analyst can answer with confidence yet, but that every analyst is asking, because the answer reshapes every other calculation currently in play across this entire conflict. What does Russia do? Not what does Russia say. What does Russia do? Those are different questions, and they have been different questions throughout this conflict. Russia has said a great deal. Russia's actions have been calibrated, measured, deliberately inconclusive. The gap between Russia's words and Russia's actions has been one of the structural features of this conflict, one of the things that kept it from expanding even further, even faster. That gap may just have closed. Option 1. Russia issues a formal and strongly worded diplomatic protest, demands full accountability through international legal channels, calls an emergency session of the UN Security Council where it knows it has veto power, summons the Israeli ambassador in Moscow for a conversation that gets described afterward in appropriately grave language by both sides, continues its foundational policy of restrained condemnation while internally recalibrating what it will allow to happen next. The international community exhales collectively. The incident becomes a significant but ultimately manageable data point in a longer and still unresolved diplomatic argument. The restraint holds. This is the outcome everyone is hoping for. It is not the outcome that can be assumed. Option 2. Russia decides that this strike taken together with the Bushehr attack, taken together with weeks of watching the region it has invested in and cultivated and positioned itself within, gets systematically dismantled, crosses an internal threshold that it cannot absorb without materially changing its posture in this conflict. And here is what makes that option particularly consequential. Russia does not have to fire a single missile to change everything about this war. It does not have to deploy a single soldier. It does not have to do anything that looks, on the surface, like direct military engagement. Russia has options operating entirely in the space between diplomatic protest and armed conflict, options that would fundamentally and perhaps irreversibly alter the military balance in this theater overnight. Consider what Russia could provide to Iran that Iran does not currently have. Advanced air defense systems, not the systems Iran has been operating, which have been degraded and in some cases destroyed, but the S-400 and S-500 systems that represent a generational leap in capability beyond what Israel's Air Force has been encountering. Systems that would narrow, potentially to the point of elimination, the operational window that Israel has been flying through for months, targeting intelligence drawn from Russian satellite assets that have been watching this conflict from above with a level of resolution and continuity that changes the accuracy calculus of every strike Iran has been attempting. Electronic warfare capabilities that could systematically degrade the GPS and communication systems that Israeli and American operations depend on in ways that cannot be easily countered or patched. Russia has all of these things. Russia has had all of these things throughout this conflict. The question has always been whether Russia would provide them. Until last night, the answer appeared to be not yet. Option 3 is the one that no one's scenario planning has adequately wargamed. Because until the moment Israeli munitions hit that building in Nabatea, it wasn't meaningfully on the board. Option 3 is the one that serious analysts are declining to write down in their public assessments while quietly gaming out in private. The option where Nabatea is not an incident, but a trigger. Where Russia's accumulated patience, its Bushehr silence, its weeks of watching reaches a conclusion that the policy of restraint has failed to produce the outcome restraint was supposed to produce, and that a different kind of signal is required. Not because Russia wants escalation, but because Russia has calculated that the cost of continued restraint now exceeds the cost of a demonstrable response. Great powers have made that calculation before. The historical record of what follows is not uniformly encouraging. Here's the thing about the Bushehr strike that becomes newly relevant in light of last night. When Israel struck Bushehr, the world held its breath. Russia's nuclear technicians were there. Russian state investment was embedded in that facility. Russia's response was to issue a statement calling the attack deeply concerning and a violation of international norms. It was the kind of statement that, in the context of a crisis of that magnitude, represented the diplomatic equivalent of a yellow card, a formal notation of displeasure that stopped well short of consequence. That statement was received in Tel Aviv. It was analyzed, its implications were weighed, and someone concluded that the yellow card did not foreclose future action. Whether that conclusion was correct, whether it reflected an accurate read of Russia's actual tolerance threshold, or whether it was a catastrophic misreading of a patience that had specific and non-negotiable limits, is a question that the next 72 hours will begin to answer. The official Russian statement, when it comes, will be studied with a level of analytical intensity that very few diplomatic documents receive. The specific language will tell trained readers things that the surface meaning of the words does not convey. Whether the statement uses the word sovereignty in connection with the Nabatea building, whether it explicitly links the cultural center strike to the Bushehr strike and treats them as a pattern rather than isolated incidents, whether it invokes the legal framework of cultural property protection under international humanitarian law, whether it makes a demand, specific and bounded, with an implicit or explicit timeline attached, or whether it records an objection for the historical record and nothing more, whether it uses language that, in the established diplomatic vocabulary that Russia deploys with precision, signals a change in posture rather than a continuation of existing policy. Those distinctions are not academic. They are the difference between a very bad week in an already catastrophic conflict and the beginning of a genuinely different war. And here is what makes this moment uniquely dangerous in ways that go beyond the direct Russia-Israel dimension. None of the other pressures that were already pushing this conflict toward the edge of manageability have paused to accommodate this new development. They don't pause. They don't wait for diplomatic cables to be exchanged and official statements to be issued and red lines to be clarified. They run on their own timelines, independent of each other, accumulating simultaneously. Kuwait's oil storage clock is still running. Approximately 14 days of remaining capacity at current production rates, with the Strait of Hormuz still functionally closed to commercial shipping, with no realistic prospect of that closure ending in 14 days. Iraq is already past its buffer with roughly 6 days remaining. When those tanks hit capacity, production stops. Not slows, stops. And when Gulf oil production stops, the global price impact is not gradual, it is vertical. Analysts who were modeling 153 weeks ago are now running 200-plus scenarios, not as tail risk, but as central case projections based purely on storage timeline arithmetic. Qatar's LNG disruption has not reversed. Europe, which already lost Russian gas in 2022 and restructured its entire energy import architecture around Qatari supply as the primary alternative, is now facing the simultaneous unavailability of both its major external sources. Russian gas gone. Qatari LNG disrupted. European winter energy reserves already stressed beyond what utility planners built their models around. The energy security crisis that European governments have been managing through a combination of emergency imports demand reduction measures and public assurances is now tipping into territory where the assurances are becoming harder to sustain against the arithmetic of actual supply. Iran's midnight strike cycle continues. The structured campaign of simultaneous pressure across multiple theaters, Gulf infrastructure in the morning, naval assets in the afternoon, American military installations in the evening, Israel at midnight has not paused. It was not designed to pause for diplomatic incidents. It was designed to prevent recovery windows from opening, to keep every defense system simultaneously under stress, to ensure that no single target gets the time it needs to restock, reorient, and repair. That operational logic has not changed because a building in southern Lebanon got hit. Israel's degraded radar and alert network, already operating at a fraction of its designed capability following weeks of targeted strikes on its detection infrastructure, has not been repaired overnight. The population of Israel is still receiving less warning than the system was built to deliver. The admission that came from Israel's own government acknowledging this gap, the single most significant military acknowledgement of this entire conflict, has not been walked back. The gap is real, and it remains real, and Iran's response cycle has not ended. The Kabarshan missiles, the Fatah hypersonics, the Sejil long-range systems that hit Haifa's oil refinery in direct reciprocal response to Israeli strikes on Iranian refinery infrastructure were not a final move. They were the latest move in an exchange that both sides have characterized as ongoing, and that neither side has defined an endpoint for in terms that make that endpoint reachable through any sequence of battlefield action currently available. Every day this conflict has added a new dimension that the day before was not yet visible on the map. Azerbaijan's territory drawn into Iran's warning framework, American water infrastructure in Iran struck by the United States, Iranian threats to Gulf desalination plants, existential threats to cities that have no natural fresh water and cannot sustain their populations without the industrial plants that convert seawater into something drinkable. European energy security collapsing in parallel with Gulf economic security. Oman, the quietest and most diplomatically careful state in the entire region, breaking its silence to issue a public call for an immediate end to the conflict because even the most cautious actors have concluded that the damage has